Recently, when I was in Letters2, someone asked me a question. Someone asked me a shaila question, which I think deserves to be understood and to be unpacked. And I think it's a thing that people, certainly people that are involved in learning text, studying inside in original sources, maybe bump up to. Which is the question that this person asked me was, they heard about this particular tzaddik, this particular righteous person, and it was connected to that time period. That was their yard site, the time of passing. And what they heard about this person, this individual tzaddik, was very inspiring to them, and they felt very connected energetically to this particular person. So they opened up the sefer, they opened up the book that this person wrote, or his students wrote, and the text seemed very harsh, the opposite of what they thought they would find in the text. And they leafed through it, and they looked, and they said it was very harsh and very with a heavy hand, and speaking with a lot of rebuke, and it was not something they expected. So there was like a disconnect between what they thought they would find in the sefer, in the book, and this holy book, and their experience of it. So what do we do if this occurs, possibly? When you're trying to read something, you're trying to engage in a particular text, especially because you feel inspired by the author and its connection to the author. But then when you open up the text, you open up the sefer, you open actually a book, it doesn't resonate with you. Or it's even the opposite, it's jarring, it's the opposite. They have this disconnect to the text. What do you do? So and of course we're talking about a text, a sefer that is part of the Mosiris HaTorah, part of the tradition, and has been accepted as a valid expression of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral tradition. So there are two ways how to think about this. One way is to think about it top down, and one way is bottom up. And to divide this in two time periods, there will be something we can call like classic understanding of Kabbalah, particularly reaches zenith in the teachings of the Holy Arizal in the 1500s. And that will be seen as an idea of top-down, because the entire project of the Ari, the teachings of the Holy Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, is about drawing down or light from a higher place into a lower. Higher and lower is not on a literal level, but on a deeper level, what they represent. And the essential idea is to draw down higher lights and even higher lights, higher illumination, higher enlightenment, higher sensitivity, higher interconnectivity. And then there's the bottom up approach, which is the opposite, which is, if this is the masculine and the feminine, so one was the masculine drawing into the feminine, or you saw the Malchus, the Zohar HaMinah Malchus, which should be the classic Vav and the Hey, drawing down from the masculine into the feminine, from the above into the below. Again, above and below doesn't literally mean this in a literal sense. And then the other one is the feminine aspect, which is the below rising upwards, the bottom up. And that's certainly more an expression of the teachings of Chassidus and the teachings of the Holy Baal Shem Tov and his students and disciples and disciples' disciples. One is more in the classic way of birurim, which is sifting through, drawing out, teasing out. And one is more in the path of yichudim, of unification. This is one of the big chidushim, one of the big novelties in the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, Torah Chassidus, that not only are we drawing down from a higher level of Atzilus, from the higher level of unity, of oneness, from the perception of oneness, into the world of duality, into the world of apparent separation, but the deepest level is the elevation of the lower and the integration of the lower into the higher, which means drawing Asiya, the physical reality, into the world of Atzilus, drawing it upwards. Now, the drawing of upwards doesn't mean that it eliminates. When the light is drawn from above to below, then the light overwhelms the vessel is the below, and it becomes just about the light. When the vessel is refined in a way that it also elevates to the highest level of light, again, these are all metaphors, that means that the vessel still remains a vessel. It's just open now to receive light. It's almost the transformation of the vessel into light itself. This is the Alter Rebbe, for example, writes in Parshas Vayetze, in Torah, where he speaks about this at length, this idea, which is a chiddush in Torah Chassidus, a great novelty in the teachings of Chassidus, which is the transformation of Iskafia and Ishapchad, where the transformation of the physical, of the world of the place of the ego and the world of separation, and the consciousness of the world of separation is transformed itself into a reality of Atzilus, which means that there's the elevation of the lower into the higher. The lower still remains lower in its capacity to be finite and expressed in its individuality and its particularity, but in that state it also receives the light from. So this is the rising. This is the metaphor or the example of this, which is that's why it's a tremendous delight and pleasure and the sava, and there's a desire for this. Is he brings down from his teacher, the Alter Rebbe brings down from the Magid. He's kemashal atzipar the bears, just like a bird, a parrot that's speaking. That's the chiddush. It's the novelty. That's something that you think could not do something. A human being speaks. They're saying words of wisdom or some words of intelligence or words of love or meaning. Then it can be pleasurable. If not, it's just people of alma just saying words. It's moving air. But a parrot, even though they're saying things that are not logical, or at least they don't understand what the logic is, it brings joy because it's a chiddush, it's a novelty. And that's the transformation of the lower to the higher. So let's use these two paradigms as an example of two ways how this can be done. Either this is done from the top down or from the bottom up. So with regards to the Torah itself, we'll talk about the Torah itself. Chazal say, the Gemara says in the Dar, the Gemara says, Talmud says, that Amma of the arts that everyone was trying to ponder to understand on what was the Torah was, why was the Torah lost? Why was the world lost? Why was the world in a certain state? And why was it a certain punishment or some type of negativity that was experienced? And Chazal say that the reason they figured out was because they didn't make a blessing before they learned Torah. What does it mean they didn't make a blessing? So the Ran famously writes, that what does it mean that they didn't make a blessing? Of course, they learned Torah, and that they studied the Torah, and they were involved in Torah, but it wasn't precious enough to make a blessing over it. And what's particularly the blessing, as the Bach writes, that the idea of the Birchas HaTorah, the blessing of the Torah, is the Nois Torah, the giver of the Torah, which means they were learning the Torah, but they weren't connected to the giver of the Torah. So the Torah is Anon Nafshik Savis Yavis, like the Ein Yaakov writes in Shabbos, the gears of the Ein Yaakov in Shabbos, Anon Nafshik Savis Yavis, that the word Anoichi is an acronym. When it says Anoichi Hashem Lakecha, I am Hashem, which is the beginning of the revealing of the Torah, is Anon Nafshik Savis Yavis, which means I gave myself into the Torah. Nafshi, myself, my essence of myself, my infinite being, was revealed within the Torah. That the Torah is a Rishim of Elikus, the Shem is an imprint of the divinity, a finite / infinite imprint of something that's really infinite and constantly and remains always infinite. So in the Torah itself, there is the words of the Torah, the logic of the Torah. There's a certain understanding and logic to the Torah, and then there's the essence of the Torah. The essence of the Torah is the Nois Torah, the giver of the Torah. And the Nois Torah, when we make this blessing of Nois Torah, that Hashem gives us the Torah, so it's not said in past tense, but it's understood that in the Torah itself, there's a revealing of the Nois, of the giver of the Torah continuously. Like the Alter Rebbe writes famously in Tanya Perikei, when a person understands Torah, they're grasping Kaviyachol, the essence of Elikos. You're grasping the essence of divinity, as much as, of course, we can grasp essence of divinity, which is always infinite and always beyond our grasp. So the grasping of the ungraspable. that possibility is an awareness that we're always connected when we're learning Torah. That's what the idea of Torah Lishma is. The idea of Torah Lishma, certainly according to the Baal Shem and certain Rishonim, also in the Gemara in Darim Chafalef, that the idea of Torah Lishma, the idea of Torah Lishma is the idea of L'Shem HaTorah, for the purpose of the Torah, which is L'Shma, L'Shem HaHei, L'Shem of the name of Hashem, which means when we're learning Torah, we're always connected to the essence of the Torah, which is the giver of the Torah, which is HaKadosh Baruch, which is the infinite one. So Shlei Baruch HaTorah Chil means they didn't make a blessing, means they weren't connected. When they were learning it as logic. Lashkichem Torah Secha, they were learning it as a Torah, as some type of lahavla, like another philosophy, another idea, another logical construct, another philosophy, or another rationality of something, another overlay of reality. But there was no Torah Secha, there was no your Torah. They forgot the nice not Torah. They were not connected to the nice not Torah. Even the Gishmak, which is other opinion of the Rishonim, which is the idea of Torah Lishma, is that we, like the Rosh writes, that you should have the Lishma means that we or Ben Yonah, that the idea of Lishma means to relish in the Torah, not for a purpose of knowing for a particular reason, but the Shashua Torah, the essence of the desire of the Torah. That is as famously the Anglital, the Agdama writes, that itself is Torah Lishma. Is the same idea with the Baal Shem Tov is, which means that we have to learn Torah to connect to the essence of the Creator and recognize that through learning Torah we're connecting to Hashem Himself. Kafiyachol. This is why the Torah is the names of Hashem. All the entire Torah is the names of Hashem. Famously, also, like the Ramban writes, Nachmanides writes in the beginning of the Akdama of the Pirush al Torah. The Ramban writes that Kol HaTorah Kula Shmois HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whose names of Hashem, Bereish, Yisbara, Elikim, etc. Okay, you divide them differently, not in the way they're divided now. Or even deeper, as the Zohar Kodesh writes, Parashat Yisro and other places, that Kol HaTorah Kula is Shem Echad, is one name of Hashem. So when we're learning Torah, we're connecting to the essence of Hashem. So when you understand that when you're learning Torah, when you're learning text, and we're talking about particularly Torah, and you're learning Chumash, you're learning the 5 books, you're learning the Chumash, or you're saying Tehillim, you're reading the Torah as Hashem, the Torah of Hashem, and you have a certain understanding of Hashem Kaviyachol from the Torah itself, and a certain understanding. So then, when you read text, and in the Torah, and the Torah seems to be very harsh and full of rebuke, then it's automatic, not that you're making an excuse and trying to reread the text, but you're reading the text because of your relationship to the Nois Torah, to the giver of the Torah. And because your relationship is understood, that you understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Teva Tov L'Heiz, the nature of good is to give good. And HaKadosh Baruch Hashem is Arachmim and compassion. Kel Racham V'chanan, Hashem is a Racham V'chanan and compassionate one. And that's what we know about Hashem. That's what we know about the giver of the Torah. And then when you come to a verse that seems to be almost the opposite, that seems to be full of like harshness and judgment, and being judgmental, then you don't have to reread the text to say, I can't read the text this way because I have a certain understanding of what Hashem is, so therefore I must read it. It's an automatic. I'll give you an example. Let's say you know somebody that really loves you unconditionally, and absolutely, and for many years you trust this person, and it's a spouse, let's say, or let's even a parent, and it's 100% that this person loves you and wants the best for you, and always was comforting and always was giving. And a parent, let's say, is an example, a good parent, and a parent that was always loving to you. And one day you receive a letter, an email from them, that superficially, if you read it, you'll say, wow, what happened? Why are they saying such harsh things against me? If you have a true good relationship with your parent or your spouse, and a true loving relationship, you're not going to try to reread the text and try to find that it's really a loving letter. It's going to be automatic. Because you have a relationship with this person, and you know that they want your best, and you know that they're loving. So when you read something that appears to your own constriction and your own constricted mind, the way you are right now, it seems to be that this seems oppressive or something that's very negative. It's automatic that your reading of it is going to be in a positive way. So again, it's not that you're trying to reread the text and try to redeem the text and say, it doesn't have to mean this, it can mean also that. You know, when the Alter Rebbe, the famous story with the Alter Rebbe is that when the Alter Rebbe used to read the Torah, he used to read the rebukes of the Torah, So the Mittler Rebbe was always there. His son was always there. One year the Alter Rebbe didn't read the Torah. And when they started reading the Torah of the rebuke, the Teichacha, the Mittler Rebbe fainted. And they woke him up, and he fainted again, and woke him up and fainted away. And then they asked him, what happened? He says, because did you hear what the Torah is telling us? It's horrible things. So he said, but you hear this every year. You know this. What do you mean? You know these psukim. You know these verses. He says, yes. But when my father reads them, it doesn't hear that. I don't hear it that way. Which means the Alter Rebbe was connected to the Eibishter and to Hashem in the highest level. In the level of less smaller b'hayatik, in the high level of Keser, Pnimis Atik, like the Neshama of the Alter Rebbe came from, of the Neshama Chadash that comes from Pnimis Atik, like it's written in Kudas Yon Shetayr Chassidus, in Von Kudas Shir Ashir, that comes from Pnimis Atik. So when a person on the tzaddik that's on such a level that comes from the Pnimis Atik, at the place of pure pleasure, pure divine love, where there's less smaller b'hayatik, there's no negativity in that place. When they read the rebuke, it's not that they have to reinterpret it into a different way. It's automatic. They're reading the letter of their loved one as love. You know, famously, the Baal Shem Tov, the teaching from the Baal Shem, that the Toldus brings down a Parshas Boy, and he brings it also down in Safs Paneach, that it says, Kel nekamas Hashem, Kel nekamas Efi. Hashem is a God of vengeance. Hashem is a God that appears. This is a pasuk that says in Tehillim, in Psalms 94, Tzadik Dalad. Kel nekamas Hashem. So what does Baal Shem Tov say? Baal Shem Tov famously says on this, that what is Kel nekamas? What does it mean that God is a God of vengeance? Kel, and Kel is also Chesed. Kel Chesed Kol Hayom. That Kel, the name of Hashem, that is connected to Kel Chesed. He says, for example, he gives a metaphor, an example, a mashal, that there was once a simpleton that insulted the king or did something worse than the king. And right away the king elevated this person, instead of punishing, the king elevated this person as a minister, or gave him an important position in the court. The king was a very compassionate and loving king. And of course, the reason why this person cursed the king, because he didn't really know who the king was. And he just heard the Lashon Hara, he heard the negative speech about the king, and he said something negative. But the king was really a loving and good person. So this simpleton who cursed the king is now all of a sudden becomes a servant of the king, and maybe even a minister of the king, and hears and sees how the king interacts with people, and he sees what kind of loving king he starts to feel terrible. And the king, every time he wants to create more remorse by the person, so he should really be connected to the king, he elevates this simpleton to a higher level until he becomes like the second in command, and he's the king's right hand man, and he feels terrible for the fact that he insulted the king previously or did something worse. So Kel nekamas Hashem, the God of vengeance, not Hashem chas shalom of vengeance and does something against you. On the opposite, Kel nekamas Hashem, Kel nekamas Efi. Hashem is Efi. Hashem reveals himself more to you. The more you distance yourself from the Creator, the more you distance yourself from Hashem, from God, the more Hashem comes and shows you more love and reveals to you more. And then you recognize, wow, I can get close to the King, and why am I so distant? Did the Baal Shem Tov have to be creative to reread this verse, this pasuk? That Kel nekamas doesn't mean God of vengeance the way we interpret the vengeance. Someone that smacks you, God forbid, does something negative. But it's a fear that Hashem reveals himself. Did he have to recontextualize the text? No. The Baal Shem, because he was so connected to Hashem, and he was so connected to the Nois HaTorah, the Birchas HaTorah, the Nois HaTorah, the giver of the Torah, the non nafshi, the nefesh, kaviyachol, the soul of the Creator that was given over into the Torah, to the name of Hashem, to the Yud Kei Vav, the ultimate name of Hashem and beyond the name. Because he was connected to that, automatically it's like he received that letter from his most beloved person that he loves the most and loves him the most. And of course, the person is saying love. It's just you have to see it. You know, the Alter Rebbe writes in the beginning of Tanya, the Akdama, in the introduction to the Tanya, that this book that I write, this book of Tanya, is Hadibur Shechiba Matzah B'neinos. These are words that are spoken, words of love that are spoken between us. So when you read the Tanya, and at any time you're reading the text, it feels a little harsh, then you know you're not reading the right text. Because if the Alter Rebbe is saying himself, this is Dibur Shel Chiba, these are words of love that I spoke to my students, to my disciples. And B'yodim Akira Kamina, like the Gemara says in Megillah, B'yodim Akira Kamina means the people that I know intimately, that I have a deep, intimate relationship. Historically, this is the person, the Alter Rebbe is speaking, but of course he's speaking for all generations. And he's saying, this is Dibur Chiva B'nein, this is the words of love that I spoke. So if you're reading the Tanya, you don't see love, you're not reading the book correctly. And the same thing is also with the Torah. If you're reading the Torah and you're not feeling chiba, you're not feeling love, you're not feeling the teva toiv lahita, the nature of good is to give good. You're reading the Torah, Torah or Tanakh, and you're not feeling within the Torah, you're not feeling love. Know that you're not reading the letter correctly. So what you have to do, what does a person have to do? They have to try to connect themselves to the giver of the Torah. Same thing also with not only specifically to the Chumash, but any text that we read. And let's say it was created through a human being, even like the Alter Rebbe Akdama Tanya, also with Ruach HaKodesh, and according to Shayash HaNeshama, written with divine providence, with divine insight. They're coming from a certain place. And if you want to connect to the teachings, and you're not connecting to the teachings correctly, you have to connect to the teacher. This is why in the teachings of Dari, in the writings of Dari, in Sha'ar Gigulim and Sha'ar Ruach HaKodesh, many times, Sha'ar Kedushah in the fourth part, the Arizal talks about that in order for a person to truly understand something, sometimes a certain type of Havan, a certain type of understanding, even in Torah, they should go to the certain graves of certain tzaddikim. And they should do yichudim, they should do all types of unifications, the nefesh to the nefesh, the ruach to the ruach, all the types of unifications they should do with these neshamas, souls of tzaddikim. Why? What's the idea of connecting, like the Mittler Rebbe writes in Kudish Shtatchus on the fifth madrega, it's nefesh benefesh, and there's an ibur, and higher level of the ibur, stavka rucha berucha, the level of the one and one, the nefesh and truach and shamachai yechida, with the different names of Hashem, Yud Kevavke Adonai and Eke, become one, and your mamish come one with the soul of the tzaddik and the ibur level of tzaddik, impregnation of the level of the tzaddik. Why do we have to do this to understand Torah? Because if you don't, if you really want to understand the teachings of the person, you need to be connected to that noisan, to that giver. Because it's not just intelligence. When a person's expressing experiences, we read the teachings of the Arizal, for example, the teachings of the Arizal is the Arizal's experience of divinity. It's not a philosophy of divinity, understanding of divinity, a construct, a Neoplatonic, God forbid, a construct of what it would look like in the expression of divinity. It's the Arizal's experience, and every single day, like and every single day, Rabbi Shimon writes that every single that the kavanas of the Ari of Shemona Esrei, for example, or of Tefillah is an experience that the Arizal had that day. One day in the life of the Arizal, that was the intention. Not only that was the intention, that was the experience. So when you're reading the teachings of the Arizal, if you're reading it as information, you don't understand what you're reading. It's not information. It's an expression of an experience. It's an expression of dveikus, of unity. And when a tzaddik is giving over a certain Torah, it's an expression of love. Their love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and their love to Klal Yisrael. This is Torah Samus, like the Kedush Levi writes. That this is the idea of real Torah that's coming, that is not only Torah's chesed, but it's Torah Samus, not only Torah's chesed, which is a kind Torah, but it's a Torah Samus, like the Akdama and the Ketzos. That it's a kind Torah, it's an emes Torah, it's a true Torah, the Torah of Avis Yisrael. So if you know that the tzaddik is coming from the place of Avis Yisrael and dveikus and connectivity, when you're reading that text, if you're not feeling dveikus and you're not connectivity and cleaving and oneness with Hashem, and you're not feeling ava, you're not feeling love to yourself, love to Hashem, love to others, you're not experiencing that, then you're not experiencing really what the text is about. This is why it's so important, before we get to text, but it's so important to have a living teacher. The Gemara says in Aaron, that a person has to see the teacher, that you should see your teacher, not only but from the face. Why? Because Chacham Sadna Torah Panav, when a person is giving over teachings, the wisdom is revealed in their face. There's famously the Rosh Saran, the Ran, previous the same Ran, but here it's in the Roshas. The Ran writes in Drush 8, Drush Ches, that Chacham Sadna Torah Yi Sheife ala Talmud Yosef Kasher Yibuluah. Ki HaShefa HaNishbel Rav Anir B'Fanik Koshakasav Chacham Sadna Torah Panav. That when the teacher is giving over, there's a certain type of wisdom that's coming through the face of the teacher, and the expression and the light of the teacher. And the student receives that. So it's not only the information, they're receiving the essence, the nefesh of the tzaddik. Or like the Yaros Dvash, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, the Rabbi Yonasan writes in Drush Yud Beis, in Drush 12, He writes, "Aroyes bekamu mena bircha shefa v'toiv. Ki aroye pnei tzadik meish lenafshe shefa toiv v'bracha ki olav chol v'shoyra or shchina." That a person that sees the tzaddik receives shefa, flow of toiv, of goodness and blessings, and the light of the Shekhinah, because you're receiving not just the information, you're receiving the light of the Shekhinah. So this is always to remember, of course, if it's possible to see, but if it's not, if you have a book and the person must have lived already many years ago, try to connect to the tzaddik himself, to sort of remember the biography, the story of who this person was and how they lived. And once you try to impart that and live that with this type of consciousness, so then you connect to the Or, you connect it to the light of the person. The Or is already the place before the words. The words are already a reduction of the light. There's a certain light, there's a certain experience that the person had of Dvekas and of Ava, which is parallel in the teachings of the Rebbe, which is the world of Atzilus, the Or, the light, the experience. Like the Rebbe Rashab also writes in Ayin Beis, this idea of Luchas Rishonos is the Lioisis, Ois Chakukais, without letters, which means letters are already a reduction of the thought, of the experience. I'm trying to give over an experience, I give it over with words. But then we're giving over with words already, it's not already the experience. So try as much as we can, this is the top down, to try to connect to the tzaddik himself, connect to the Or of the tzaddik, the nefesh of the tzaddik, the soul of the tzaddik, the Amunah Avivira, which is the faith of the tzaddik, the love of the tzaddik, the awe of the tzaddik. Like also the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, after Menel B'Tefka passed away, that the life of the tzaddik is not physical life, but it's Amunah Avivira. These three things, it's the faith of the tzaddik. Let the tzaddik live with this type of faith, and this type of love, and this type of awe. When you connect with it, then when you read their words, all you're experiencing is their Amunah, their Ava, their Yira. That's the Nois Torah. You're experiencing what they experience. And it's opening you up, the text is opening up to the experience what they had. So connect to, not just to the text itself, connecting to the Lord. That's the top down path. Then there's the other path, which is more aligned with the teachings of Torah Chassidus, which is that it's from the bottom up. Which means the author, the person that giving over, the transmitter of this Torah, to say it in a modern parlance, is that the author, in a stark way, the author is that long live the reader. Which means that it's not about the author anymore, it's already about the reader. Once this thing is given over to the Messiah, then it becomes a nachas haklal. It becomes the inheritance of the collective. It's received. Once it's received in a way that it's received by the subjective. I'll give you a story, and then we'll try to unpack this idea a little bit further. That Tzemach Tzedek once said a Maimer, the third Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek once said a very deep Chassidic discourse. And after he said this, after he transmitted it, Divrei Elokim Chaim, words of the living God, which means it came through him, not from him. Of course, he created the context which should come through him. There was a debate between his son, who later became their Marash, Reb Shmuel, the youngest son of Tzemach Tzedek, and I think it's Reb Hillel Paracher. The great Chassid Reb Hillel, big tzaddik, big Bamoifis, and a holy Jew. And Reb Hillel and the Reb Marash were arguing what the Tzemach Tzedek meant. One said he meant this thing, and one said, I think he meant something else. So they came into the Tzemach Tzedek. The debate was a raging debate, and they couldn't figure out which one. And there was certain Chassidim said Reb Hillel was right, certain Chassidim Reb Marash was right, and there was an argument. So they decided, let's go to the originator, the person that said it. So let's go into the Tzemach Tzedek. They went into the Tzemach Tzedek. And they told the Tzemach Tzedek that Reb Hillel said that I think what you meant was this. And the Reb Marash said, I think what you said was this. And after discussing this back and forth, the Tzemach Tzedek said that the Reb Marash is correct. Reb Hillel understood it a little incorrectly. So Reb Hillel said, you're my Rebbe, but I just want to say that I disagree with you. And you're asked, how could I disagree with you? Because when you said the Maimer, when you said the Maimer, it was Divrei L'Chaim, it came through you. But once it became the Nachas HaKlal, once it became part of the Mesiras HaTorah, part of the tradition, part of the oral living tradition of Torah, and it was received by us, now it belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you. So you're an intelligent person, and I'm an intelligent person. You say this way, I say this way. This is what Reb Hillel said, which is Kach Darkei Shel Torah. This is the way of Torah. So, what is this saying? The saying is like this, and this is even more true with printed words, because printed words, when you speak words, there's an immediate transmission from the living presence of the person that's speaking the words to the words that they're saying to it being received. There's no dead space in between. But in there's besofer, besipur, or besefer. So, like it says in the beginning of Sefer Yetzirah. So the sofer, the author, is telling over the sipur, telling over the story, and immediately it's held by the sefer, held by the person that's receiving that story, and it's a living presence because it was just spoken. But when ideas are put into words, then it's besefer or besefer. It becomes two books, because the sefer, the author writes a sefer. This is what the Gra writes also. The author writes the sefer writes the sefer. Let's say author, this individual person writes the book. Now the book is received by the reader. That's a second book. That's a different book. It could be a different book, because every person reads through their own subjective prisms and their own way of understanding and own experiences of life. So the author revealed in the book her particular way of understanding things, and maybe even a transmission of ideas into the book. But once it appears in a book, it already appears now, and it's living